Heart of Darkness, Chapter 2, page 27. One evening, as I was lying flat on the deck of my steamboat, I heard voices approaching, and there were the nephew and the uncle strolling along the bank. I laid my head on my arm again, and had nearly lost myself in a doze, when somebody said in my ear, as it were, "I'm as harmless as a little child, but I don't like to be dictated to. Am I the manager, or am I not? I was ordered to send him there. It's incredible." I became aware that the two were standing on the shore alongside the part of the steamboat, just below my head. I did not move. It did not occur to me to move. I was sleepy. "It is unpleasant," grunted the uncle. "He has asked the administration to be sent there," said the other, "with the idea of showing what he could do, and I was instructed accordingly. Look at the influence that man must have. Is it not frightful?" They both agreed it was frightful, then made several bizarre remarks. Make rain and fine weather, one man, the council, by the nose. Bits of absurd sentences that got the better of my drowsiness, so that I had pretty near the whole of my wits about me when the uncle said, "The climate may do away with this difficulty for you. Is he alone there?" "Yes," answered the manager. "He sent his assistant down the river with a note to me in these terms: 'Clear this poor devil out of the country, and don't bother sending me more of that sort. I'd rather be alone than have the kind of men you can dispose of with me.' It was more than a year ago. Can you imagine such impudence?" "Anything since then?" asked the other hoarsely. "Ivory," jerked the nephew. "Lots of it. Prime sort. Lots. Most annoying from him." "And with that?" questioned the heavy Rumble. "Invoice," was the reply, fired out, so to speak. Then silence. They had been talking about Kurtz. Okay, so number 1, explain the conversation Marlowe hears one night on his steamboat. He happens to overhear the manager and his uncle talking about Kurtz and how much they don't like him. So the central station manager and his uncle are talking about how they don't like Kurtz, number 1. And then what were Kurtz's demands, number 2? He didn't want any more worthless agents to supposedly help him. I just did air quotes. I guess they're scare quotes if you can hear them audibly. He didn't want anybody else out there. He'd rather be alone in the jungle. And, okay. I was broad awake by this time, but lying perfectly at ease, remained still, having no inducement to change my position. "How did that ivory come all this way?" growled the elder man, who seemed very vexed. The other explained that it had come in with a fleet of canoes in charge of an English half-caste clerk Kurtz had with him. That Kurtz had apparently intended to return himself, the station being by that time bare of goods and stores, but after coming 300 miles had suddenly decided to go back, which he started to do alone in a small dugout with 4 paddlers, leaving the half-caste to continue down the river with the ivory. The 2 fellows there seemed astounded at anybody attempting such a thing. They were at a loss for an adequate motive. As to me, I seemed to see Kurtz for the first time. It was a distant glimpse, the dugout, 4 paddling savages, and the lone white man turning his back suddenly on the headquarters, on relief, on thoughts of home, perhaps setting his face toward the depths of the wilderness, towards his empty and desolate station. I do not know the motive. Perhaps he was just simply a fine fellow who stuck to his work for its own sake. His name, you understand, had not been pronounced once. He was that man. The half-caste, who, as far as I could see, had conducted a difficult trip with great prudence and pluck, was invariably alluded to as that scoundrel. The scoundrel had recovered imperfectly. The 2 below me moved away a few paces, and strolled back and forth at some little distance. Okay, so Kurtz and somebody who is one of his agents that are with him are supposed to return a bunch of ivory down from the upper station or the inner station to the central station. And this will make sense if you've ever seen a picture of the Congo River. But to go back up it in a canoe is kind of insane. And so he got most of the way to the central station and then sent this poor guy on by himself with the ivory. And he took 4 native men with him back basically in a canoe. It'd be like, the river is 8 miles wide at some parts. So it's just kind of crazy that you would ever take a canoe and to go by yourself without any supplies or anything like that. So that is why he'd been destined to return to the central station. Number 3, he was returning ivory and he was supposed to be returning ivory and restocking supplies. But then what was surprising about the way he returned to the upper station, he just canoes back with 4 native people. And the poor guy he sent back with the ivory barely recovered. He's obviously no longer right in the head. He says, military post, doctor, 200 miles, quite alone now. Unavoidable delays. 9 months, no news. Strange rumors. They approached again, just as the manager was saying. No one as far as I know, unless a species of wandering trader. A pestilential fellow snapping ivory from the natives. Who was it they were talking about now? I gathered in snatches that this was some man supposed to be in Kurtz's district, of whom the manager did not approve. We will not be free from unfair competition till one of these fellows is hanged for an example, he said. Certainly, grunted the other. Get him hanged. Why not? Anything can be done in this country. That's what I say. Nobody here, you understand, here can endanger your position. And why? You stand the climate. You outlast them all. Remember how this manager has been promoted and promoted, not because he's a good manager, just because he doesn't ever get sick. The danger is in Europe, but there before I left I took care to. They moved off and whispered, then their voices rose again. The extraordinary series of delays is not my fault. I did my best. The fat man sighed. Very sad. And the pestiferous absurdity of his talk, continued the other. He bothered me enough when he was here. Each station, he's speaking like what Kurtz would have said here in this next sentence. Each station should be like a beacon on the road toward better things, a center for trade, of course, but also for humanizing, improving, instructing. Conceive you, that ass, and he wants to be manager. No, it's... Here he got choked by excessive indignation, and I lifted my head the least bit. I was surprised to see how near they were, right under me. I could have spat upon their hats. They were looking on the ground, absorbed in thought. The manager was switching his leg with a slender twig. His sagacious relative lifted his head. You've been out well since you came out this time, he asked. The other gave a start. Who, I? Oh, like a charm, like a charm. But the rest, oh my goodness, all sick. They die so quick, too, that I haven't the time to send them out of the country. It's incredible. Just so, grunted the uncle. Ah, my body, trust to this. I say trust to this. I saw him extend his short flipper of an arm for a gesture that took in the forest, the creek, the mud, the river, seeming to beckon with a dishonoring flourish before the sunlit face of the land, a treacherous appeal to the lurking death, to the hidden evil, to the profound darkness of its heart. I think you need an example for personification. Oh, yes. You do need an example for personification. There at the bottom of page 28, it says the sunlit face of the land. So there's your good example for that. Okay. It was so startling that I leaped to my feet and looked back at the edge of the forest, as though I had expected an answer of some sort to that black display of confidence. You know the foolish notions that come to one sometimes. The high stillness confronted these two figures, with its ominous patience, waiting for the passing away of a fantastic invasion. They swore aloud together, out of sheer fright, I believe, then, pretending not to know anything of my existence, turned back to the station. The sun was low, and leaning forward side by side, they seemed to be tugging painfully uphill, their two ridiculous shadows of unequal length that trailed behind them slowly over the tall grass without bending a single blade. Isn't that a nice image? You're dragging your heavy shadow along, but it flows over the grass without bending a blade. See, there's good stuff in this book. Okay, we're getting to number 5. Just a second. In a few days, the El Dorado expedition went into the patient wilderness that closed upon it as the sea closes over a diver. Here's your good example for number 29. The El Dorado exploring expedition disappears into the wilderness as the sea closes over a diver. So they go in and it's like you can't even see him anymore. Okay. Long afterwards, the news came that all the donkeys were dead. I know nothing as to the fate of the less valuable animals. He means the humans. Donkeys would have been really hard to come by. They, no doubt, like the rest of us, found what they deserved. I did not inquire. I was then rather excited at the prospect of meeting Kurtz very soon. When I say very soon, I mean it comparatively. It was just 2 months from the day we left the creek when we came into the bank below Kurtz's station. Okay, so number 5, what happens to the El Dorado exploring expedition? They got lost in the wilderness and were never heard from again. And number 6, how long does it take Marlowe to reach Kurtz's station? About 2 months. Going up that river was like traveling back to the earliest beginnings of the world, when vegetation rioted on the earth and the big trees were kings. An empty stream, a great silence, an impenetrable forest. The air was warm, thick, heavy, sluggish. There was no joy in the brilliance of sunshine. The long stretches of the waterway ran on, deserted, into the gloom of overshadowed distances. On silvery sandbanks, hippos and alligators sunned themselves side by side. The broadening waters flowed through a mob of wooded islands. You lost your way on that river as you would in a desert, and butted all day long against shoals, trying to find the channel, till you thought yourself bewitched and cut off forever from everything you had known once, somewhere far away, in another existence perhaps. There were moments when one's past came back to one, as it will sometimes when you have not a moment to spare to yourself, but it came in the shape of an unrestful and noisy dream, remembered with wonder amongst the overwhelming realities of this strange world of plants and water and silence. And this stillness of life did not in the least resemble a peace. It was the stillness of an implacable force brooding over an inscrutable intention. It looked at you with a vengeful aspect. I got used to it afterwards. I did not see it anymore. I had no time. I had to keep guessing at the channel, had to discern, mostly by inspiration, the signs of hidden banks. I watched for sunken stones. I was learning to clap my teeth smartly before my heart flew out, when I shaved by a fluke some infernal sly old snag that would have ripped the life out of the old Tin Pot steamboat and drowned all the pilgrims. I had to keep a lookout for the signs of dead wood we could cut up in the night for the next day's steaming. When you have to attend to things of that sort, to the mere incidents of the surface, the reality, I tell you, fades. The inner truth is hidden, luckily. But I felt it all the same. I felt often its mysterious stillness watching me at my monkey tricks, just as it watches you fellows performing on your respective tightrope for, what is it, half-crown a tumble? And then the frame story breaks in. "Try to be civil, Marlowe," growled a voice, and I knew there was at least one listener awake besides myself. Okay, so number 7, what are some difficulties Marlowe has while piloting a steamship up the river? He finds it hard to steer around the rocks, and he has to stop and keep finding wood for the steam engine. All right, let's take a break.